Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe that the world revolves around them and nobody else matters. And in today's episode, oh boy, guys, it's all about entitled Karens causing trouble on airplanes. So if you've ever been on a plane and your flight went smoothly, you'll want to listen to these ridiculous encounters. It'll leave you shaking your heads. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this happened a long time ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday, probably because it was the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened to me. I was on a plane back from vacation. My mom and I were sat in a row of 3, and we had a spare seat. This story also has the most useless flight attendant that I've ever had the displeasure of dealing with. So there we are in the air. The seatbelt sign was off, and we're free to roam about. The flight had a couple of spare seats, from what I could see, including the one right next to me. My mom and I had booked the middle and window seats, but I moved to sit in the aisle so we could have more space. The woman who sat in front of us, the Karen, continuously whips her head around to stare at me for a few seconds. I tried to ignore her, but it was pretty weird, because she was looking at me straight in the face. After about 20 minutes of her turning around to stare at me every few seconds, she eventually taps me on the head while I had my head down, reading and listening to music. Guys, she tapped me on my head by reaching over her seat. So I look up, pause my music, and that's when she says, "Excuse me." Her tone was very severe, to which I say, "Yes, hi." She then goes on and says, "Swap seats with me." The woman maintained eye contact the whole time, and it did take a few minutes to respond because I was dumbfounded that a complete stranger could be so rude to me. I say to her, I'm with my mom, I'd rather..." She then interrupts me and says, "You've got a spare seat. I've been traveling the last 2 days. I just want to spread out and relax, so swap seats with me." I reply, "No, please leave me alone." And that's when Karen says, "I'm not going to ask again." At this point, she was being a little loud, enough to turn heads and disturb my mom from her nap, who asked if I was okay. Karen then said, "Swap with me. I need to sit there and you can sit next to my child. You can play with him." Now, I want to note at this point that the child looked around 5 years old. I'm 18. I begin to say, "Please." And that's when Karen loses it and she shouts, "Move right now." The woman got loud enough that it actually turned everyone's head around us. She was loud enough to also summon a flight attendant, who's a mid-30s male. The guy comes over and says, "Is everything all right here?" He spoke directly to Karen, completely ignoring me, to which Karen says, "That boy won't move. He's got 2 seats to himself, and he..." My mom then interjects loudly at this point, saying, "I actually have 2 seats to myself, both of which I paid for." The flight attendant then says, "Well, I'll see what I can do." He then turns to me and he says, "This woman's asking if you'd be able to swap seats with her so she could have more space. Would you mind?" And in my mind, I'm thinking, would I mind? I tell him, no, I don't want to swap." And hearing me say that, Karen erupted. The woman starts yelling at me, calling me selfish. My mom was yelling at her back, and honestly, I was struggling not to laugh at Karen because I noticed how she was shaking as she shouted. It was honestly unreal what was happening. The useless flight attendant during this argument just told her I said no, and then backed off and effing left. Karen, realizing she was making a fool of herself, just said, "Fine, you selfish effing useless brat." She then sat back down and she swung her seat back as much as she could, which I was fine with because it was literally a couple of inches and I had plenty of space. My mom asked if I was okay and if I wanted her to make the woman move. I said I was fine, and that's when Karen starts making huffing noises. I just ignored her. I put my headphones in and the rest of the flight was fine. When we landed, Karen made sure to get up like a rocket and block the walkway so I couldn't get out of the aisle. However, I was feeling petty. So I stood up, shuffled over and said, "You don't mind, do you?" I then barged into the walkway in a way that looked accidental. The woman stumbled into someone else who promptly launched her back into her seat. It was hilarious, like watching a ping pong ball. The woman didn't move after that, and we got off the plane. I never saw her again. Guys, classic entitled adult to teenager move, right? I don't care what you want. Do what I say, hang out with my child. Like, I'm laughing because it's so outrageous. Like, why would anyone agree to do that, Karen? Why would a complete stranger want to give up their seat to play with your 5-year-old so you can relax? Especially after being so rude and tapping someone on their head to get their attention. Like, what in the world? And guys, if you think that was a little bit outrageous, we're just getting started. This just happened the other day. The scene is a Southwest airline flight. I was sitting in a window seat next to 2 lovely women, and directly horizontal from us was an empty seat, a mom and her son. The flight was taking off. I was strapped in my seat and decided to take out my Nintendo Switch from my carry-on beneath my feet to make the flight go by quicker. And that's when I hear, "Excuse me, ma'am." Now, I didn't realize it at first, that the mom in the seats horizontal from me was trying to get my attention. The woman unbuckled her belt while we're taking off, and she moved to the empty seat by the aisle, closer to me. She then repeats herself and says, "Ma'am, with the video game." I lifted my head, but the stranger next to me nudged me as well, saying, "That lady wants to get your attention." I then turned my head to see this woman just leaning across the aisle with her hands on the armrest of my aisle seat. She then said, "I'm sorry. I just want to know if there's any way that my son could use that game for a little while. He forgot his at home and I don't want him to be fussy." I just tell her, "I'm so sorry. I don't feel comfortable giving it to anyone I don't know. I don't even let my..." I was going to continue, but the woman cuts me off and says, "Oh, listen here, dear. My son is not like most kids. He's not destructive. His cousin has one of those, and he knows how to play. What games do you have on there?" The woman just smiled and she set her hand out. And the 2 women seated next to me just looked at me as if they were also in disbelief. I said again, "I'm sorry, I just don't feel comfortable with letting..." The Karen stops me right there. She then retracts her hand, slaps it on her lap, and she says, "How old are you?" I say to her, "I don't see how that matters." "Well," she began, clearly sounding agitated, "my son is 8 years old, and he needs something to keep him still. This is an 1 and 45-minute flight, and he just wants something to do. He can't see it for a few minutes." Again, I tell her, "No, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm sorry." I then put my head down and unpaused my game, as to ignore anything she had further to say. And the woman seemed genuinely livid. She says, "Are you serious?" She then looks at her kid and says, "Well, Tommy, sorry, buddy. Not everyone knows how to share." Hearing her say that, the child starts whining and kicking the seat in front of him, saying he wants to play my Nintendo. She then turns to me and says, "Thanks for this. A sweet kid just wants to share with you, and you are being ignorant about it." Before I even open my mouth, one of the ladies in my row just snaps back at her and says, "How dare you try to make her feel guilty about not wanting to give up her property? She told you so kindly that she doesn't feel comfortable with passing her electronics to a stranger, so leave her alone." But of course, Karen wasn't having it. She tells the woman she's an adult and she can't share with a child for a few minutes of a nearly 2-hour flight. That's when the woman in my row responds, "You should have brought something for him to do then." And that shut her up good. At the end of the flight, the woman collects her luggage from the overhead bins and she says, "I hope you're happy going against God's word, not sharing with a child. Shame on you." Some of the people around us giggled, and I'm sure they all overheard the drama at the beginning of the flight. I've come across some entitled people in my life, but this strange lady really took the cake. Yeah, some people just don't give up and take no for an answer, do they? Like, what part of "I don't want to give your kid my stuff" does that woman not understand? And seriously guys, I really hate when entitled Karens pull the "how old are you" card, like it'll somehow magically work. Like, I don't care, lady, I might be 30 years old, but your kid's still not getting my Nintendo. And thank goodness that lady sitting beside OP let Karen have it though, she's the MVP. And this person comments, "As a mom, that's ridiculous. Good parents plan for flights with plenty to distract their child." Exactly, right? Like, they don't try to steal things from others and then guilt trip them when they don't get what they want. But hey, Karens, right? Okay, so this happened back in January, and it still baffles me. For some context, I'm a 23-year-old male who usually visits my parents and siblings for Christmas and New Year's, because that's the only time I can see them. I'm in the airport waiting to board my flight, just sitting in the seats by the gate. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see a woman sitting across from me, and she's getting angry because her kids were tired and they wanted to get on the plane. I think nothing of it and hope she's not sat anywhere near me. Fast forward a bit and we're boarding. When I get to my seat, I swear the woman was sitting in my seat. I just tell the mother that's my seat, and she visibly gets pissed at that statement and she snaps back, "No, it's not." Me, not wanting to have a fight on the plane, grab the attention of a flight attendant and I show her my boarding pass. The flight attendant then asked her to move from my seat politely. Now, any normal person would have moved, but no, not Karen. Karen decides to fight back saying, "This is my seat. I paid for it, so F off." The flight attendant, still being polite, asked to see the boarding passes to check the seats. The entitled Karen then pulls out 2 for the seats right next to mine. The flight attendant, slightly less kind, then says, "Ma'am, these are only 2 boarding passes. Where's the 3rd one?" The mother, thinking she's smart, then says, "Oh, I must have dropped the 3rd one, so I can't give it to you." So this causes me to butt into the conversation to say that I have the boarding pass for that seat because it's my seat. And hearing that, the look on her face, you guys, you would have thought I slapped her kid or something. Because Karen then shouts, "Give me my boarding pass back, you thief." I'm just confused as to why she's so delusional at this point because obviously it's my ticket since I bought it. The next part was back and forth arguing, with the flight attendant saying that I clearly paid for this seat as it has my name on the boarding pass. After a few minutes, a grin comes across Karen's face, and she says, "Well, if you want me to move so bad, how about you pay to upgrade me and my kids to 1st class?" And yes, she actually said that. I just responded by saying, "Miss, I don't have the funds for 3 first-class tickets." The flight attendant then says to the Karen, "Either you or one of your children will have to move, or else we'll have to remove you from the flight." Then, without holding back, Karen screeches, "If I leave, he's going to touch my babies. You want that to happen?" Me and the flight attendant are physically taken aback after hearing this. After that, I stop trying to be nice, and I respond, "Get the F out of my seat and never make those claims again, you self-centered bitch." The flight attendant tries to calm me down and then calls for security. In the end, the Karen and her children were escorted off the flight, and I got a row to myself. Guys, don't you just love it when people like this get what they deserve? Like, how could she be so delusional to think that would ever work? If you want me to move, upgrade me to 1st class. Again, in what world would that work? No, how about we just call security, ma'am? And guys, the worst part of all this is she had her little kids with her, who had to witness mom getting all crazy and then getting them kicked off the plane. That's always fun, right? This story happened back in December, just after colleges let out for the winter. I'm a teacher, and my girlfriend's a grad student. So when she was done for the semester, I took a few days off from work and I joined her for a vacation down to Virginia, where her parents live. It was the first time I was gonna meet the whole family, and this was looking like a pretty serious relationship that might go all the way. We flew there on the United Express service, which is essentially a tiny tin can of an airplane where tall people can barely stand up. The seats are arranged 2 on one side and 1 on the other. Going there, we booked a 2-seater together, and the flight went off without a hitch. The trip was great. Going back, unfortunately, I had to fly alone. She planned to stay a few weeks with her parents before school started again, but I had to get back to work on Monday. I don't like flying, and I especially don't like flying solo. I'm also not a great sleeper at the best of times, so sleeping on the airplane is out. I booked myself a single seat on the left for privacy. I also brought along a decent amount of reading material, because I assumed I would be able to keep myself distracted for the 90-minute flight, or so I thought. So there I am, settled into my solo seat near the front of the standard seating. I'm distracting myself with the magazines when out of nowhere I hear a bellow of, "It'll fit just fine." There's Karen, and she storms into the plane, pulling her kid with one hand and an oversized wheeled suitcase with another. The woman proceeds to huff and puff while shoving it into the overhead compartment, despite all of us being told that baggage space is limited and we should check all hard suitcases. The woman eventually crams it in and she sits down with her kid and the flight takes off. As soon as we get going, I turn my overhead light on and get back to reading. About 5 minutes later, I'm snapped out of my distraction. When I hear, "Sir, sir," I respond, "Yes." Karen says, "You need to turn your overhead light off. My daughter and I are trying to sleep." I tell her, "I'm sorry, but I want to be able to read during this flight. It's only 6:30. That's when Karen says, "Excuse me? I'll have you know that my daughter and I have been traveling all weekend. We're both exhausted, and the least you can do is be a little more accommodating. You're the only person on this flight with her light on." I then look around, and it's true. I tell Karen, "Well, I'm sorry about that, but I can't sleep on flights. I need this light. And it's 6:30. That's when Karen says, "Okay, that's enough of that." She then gets up out of her seat, and she quickly turns my light off. She then goes back and sits down with a smug smirk on her face. I just quickly turn my light back on, and I say, "Do not touch my light again." Karen says, "Oh, really? Well, we'll see what the authorities have to say about this." And with another trademark smirk, she hits the flight attendant call button about 5 times in a row. My palms instantly get sweaty because I'm not a white dude, and any interaction with authority figures does make me nervous. But this is so absurd that I decide to see where it goes. I just get back to reading as we wait for the flight attendant to get there. The flight attendant shows up, a young woman who looks like she's had a long day, and it's about to get longer. The flight attendant says, "Can I help you, ma'am?" Karen says, "Yes, you can. This horribly rude man won't turn off his overhead light, even after I told him how tired we are. We have to fly to Cleveland tonight after this flight, and I think we deserve a little peace." The flight attendant tells her, "Well, ma'am, everyone can use their light as they want, but let me see what I could do." She then turns to me and says, "Sir, would you mind turning out the light so she can sleep?" I say to her, "I'm sorry, like I told her, I bought a solo seat so I could read." Hearing me say that, Karen shouts and says, "Just tell him to turn it off. He has to do what you say. Make him obey you." The flight attendant tells Karen, "Ma'am, we have blindfolds that you can use for you and your daughter to block out the light if you want." Karen says, "Those are probably filthy." The flight attendant says, "No, they're individually wrapped," and Karen then interrupts her and says, "Why are you making this so hard? Just make him turn it off. He has to listen to you." The flight attendant then says to me, "Sir, would you be willing to move seats so she's not bothered? We have some empty seats right there." The flight attendant then points to a seat near the back, next to another man. I tell the flight attendant, "I'm sorry, I'm catching a train after I get off, and I don't like the idea of being at the back. I'm sorry." That's when Karen says, "How dare you? You look like you belong in the back of a plane. Just get back there and stop bothering us." Now, I want to note that I was kind of casually dressed, and I had a 4-day beard. But we all know what she really meant. I say to her, "I'll pass. Also, nice racism." Karen says, "You know what I meant." She then says to the flight attendant, "Are you going to do something about this or not? Now you go talk to somebody with the authority to do something about this and get him to move, or I will have your job." The flight attendant says to me, "Sir, it's not a long flight. Would you please?" That's when I stop her and say, "I'm sorry, I don't have a problem here. She does, and she's making this entire flight miserable. I don't think I should have to inconvenience myself to make her happy." Looking defeated, the flight attendant runs up to the front of the plane to talk to who I assume are people in charge. And that's when Karen snarls at me and says, "You're in for it now. You'll be on the no-fly list after this. I hope cops come on the plane when we land and they haul your ass away." I just say to her, "Lady, you're nuts. You need to get help." The flight attendant then returns and immediately turns to me, and Karen's eyes go wide with excitement. The flight attendant then says, "Sir, would you be willing to move up 4 rows? You'll be closer to the front that way, and it's another single seat." The flight attendant doesn't say it, but we all know this is the extra legroom section that you pay a little bit more for. I say to her, "You know what, I just want this to be over with. I think that's fine." And Karen says, "Wait, he gets a better seat? Why don't you offer that to us?" To which the flight attendant tells her, "There's only single seats up there, ma'am." And Karen says, "This is ridiculous. People like him should not get rewarded. This idiot ruined our flight, and when we land, I will be informing your boss and the authorities. So you both get exactly what you." And before Karen can say another word, this old man comes in and says, "For goodness sake, lady, shut up." The woman does shut up after that, and I move to my new seat. And I wish I could tell you that this was some luxurious first-class seat, but no, it's a crappy short-haul flight in a tin can. I had maybe 2 more inches of leg room. When the flight landed, I quickly grabbed my bag and I got off, sneaking back a look as she held up the entire line, trying to wedge her suitcase free from the tiny overhead compartment. We were about 20 minutes early to the destination, so I got a bagel before catching my train. I then got to see Karen barreling past, dragging the suitcase and her kid behind her, yelling that this airport is full of idiots. The woman does catch sight of me at the bagel place, and she screams, "You are a horrible person, and I hope you go straight to hell. People like you don't deserve anything good in life." I just smiled and waved, happy that I'll never have to deal with her again. And that was the end of my encounter with Karen. It ended without police, without property damage or assault, but it certainly did nothing to make me appreciate flying more. Holy moly, did Karen really make a mountain out of that molehill? Like seriously, if you're offered a blindfold and you still won't use it, that's on you. And if I were OP at that bagel place, I would have fired back, "No ma'am, people like you don't deserve anything good in life." And that old man said it best, "Just shut up, lady." I sustained very bad injuries to my face this month. I'm in the stage of healing where the scar tissue has formed, but it's still very tender new skin. I'm gonna have very obvious facial scarring for the rest of my life. The injury starts about an inch above my hairline, goes down over my brow, and continues down my cheek where it's the deepest. I'll probably have an indentation in the fullest part of my cheek. Then it continues down to my jawline. Now, in some ways, it's okay. I'm just happy it's cosmetic damage. My friends are super reassuring, telling me how badass and how sick it's gonna look. They say I'm still as hot as ever, now even a little more sexy and mysterious. But in some ways, it really sucks. I know that I'm always going to be seen first as the girl with the scar, and it feels especially bad when people look at me differently. With that said, this week I had to fly home for a family thing. It was a plan I made long before my injury. I wasn't really looking forward to the pity or people making a big deal out of it. I'd rather it not be acknowledged. I'd also met with my dermatologist, who said I was at the stage of scar tissue formation that I no longer should be dressing the wounds. The skin was healing, and instead, I need to be applying cream to help keep the site clean and moist. It also looks a bit ugly. The building scar tissue is very red and tender, and with the Vaseline all over it, it looks slick and shiny. So on with the story. I get on the flight, and I have a window seat. I put my headphones on and drift off to sleep while the plane's still boarding. I wake up to this kid, who's maybe 4 years old, who's sitting next to me, and he's throwing a tantrum. I didn't catch the first part of it, and I honestly couldn't understand what he's yelling about. And that's when his father says to me, "Hey, can you cover that injury? It's disturbing my kid." I just say to him that my dermatologist recommends I don't, so no, I don't think I will. At that, he starts snapping at me, and he says, "There's no need to be so rude. That injury is graphic and it's disgusting. It's scaring my little one. Why didn't you think about this before getting on a public flight?" That's when I say, "This is my face, the only damn face I've got, and it sucks being told I'm so ugly that I can't show my face in public. Thanks for that." At that, the guy starts backtracking, saying, "Well, just until it's healed." And I said, "It'll always be with me. Maybe teach some effing compassion and respect instead of telling a girl half your damn age what you think about her face. That's rude." And the guy actually got up after that, and I think he went to a flight attendant about a seat change, because a young couple came and sat next to me after a few minutes. I've got to admit, I felt so low that I put my sunglasses on and I cried for a few minutes. Why are people such a-holes? Because they frickin' are OP. And I'm pretty sure many will agree that that dad's the one who shouldn't be out in public. Like, the guy literally said to a random stranger, "You should have thought about this before getting on a public flight." Which is absolutely jaw-dropping. Like, who says that to a complete stranger? Like, what a delightful human being that man is. And it could have been a great teaching opportunity for his child, right? But no, people are gross. We gotta move, kid. That was his go-to. Yeah, some people really, really do suck. But we all know that. I'm a flight attendant from a major airline, and the entitlement I encounter is crazy. This week, passengers were boarding the flight as usual. Large roll-on bag on top, personal item underneath their seat. And then this lady comes on, and she half-asses her roll-on into the overhead bin. I mean, this bag is halfway sticking out of the bin. So we make an announcement saying, LNG, please make sure your bag is properly placed in the overhead bin. This flight will be full, and if the bag doesn't fit as we're closing the bins, it'll have to be checked. I can see the lady, and she looks at her bag, and she stares out the window again. That's when a second and third announcements are made just for her. I can't stop the boarding process to talk to her directly, so whatever. I'll have to deal with her bag at the end of boarding. True to our word, the flight is completely full, and so are the bins. I approach her luggage, and of course, the bin doesn't close. So I ask the general area whose bag I was holding, as it doesn't fit as it's placed. The woman says, that's my bag, but there's people's backpacks up there. Ask them to put it under their seat so you can make it fit. Also, there's a jacket behind my bag. My bag always fits up there, she says. I look, and there's nothing behind her bag. It's too long, and it won't fit perpendicular to the aisle, and the bin's full, so I can't place it in sideways. I tell her this, and I ask her what her final destination was, so I could check it there. She refuses to tell me. Again, she repeats herself and says, make it work. Do your job. We're approaching our departure time, so I'm already flustered with the lady. So I say, I'm sorry, I can't make it work. This bag needs to be checked. We made several announcements over the last 15 minutes, and you had plenty of time to get your bag stowed properly. People have as much right to access these bins as you do, so I can't force passengers to bring down their items to accommodate yours. So I ask her again what her final destination was. The woman ignored me again, and she stares out the window. I try again and say, ma'am. No answer. Ma'am. Again, nothing. That's when I think to myself, fine. So I take the bag down and I hand it to the agent. What's the final destination, he asked. Our flight was headed to Chicago. I paused and said, Lubbock, which is a small city in Texas. Oh man, can't say she didn't deserve that, right? And hey, at least OP was kind enough to keep the location in the country instead of sending it international. Some people can be so freaking entitled. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where OP follows orders and destroys people's lives. It's such a wild episode. So go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.